welcome to the Wednesday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and today we have a really awesome guest. It is Mr. Joe St.Pierre. Joe is a writer and artist. He has worked on Rye, Secret Weapons for Valiant. He's worked on Spider-Man 2099. He also has the record of penciling the most Spider-Man #1 comics in history, which is a pretty awesome thing. He is here today. He's got a new Kickstarter out. It is called New Zodiac Pisces #1. He's doing a whole different line of books with the different signs in them. He's up to Pisces now, and it sounds like a really awesome story. So let's hear from Joe. Here is Mr. Joe St.Pierre, writer, artist Joe St.Pierre. Sir, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So let's start at the beginning. How do you first discover comics?
Ah. Very at a very young age. I have photos of me like when I'm 4 years old holding up Justice League comics and stuff like that. So very early age. I think it might have started with my grandmother who used to come and visit us on a weekly basis, and she'd bring us stuff like comics and children's magazines to read and stuff like that. I still have almost all of them. So it probably started with grandma. Thanks, Graham. Appreciate it. And then from there, it just exploded. It's like it wasn't just enough for me to read them and have fun with them.
Mhm.
I had to eat them, and then I had to make my own, make my own characters and stuff like that. So it just expanded from there.
How do you make the decision that this is a career you want to pursue?
Once again, it's, about the same time period.
Mhm.
It was just something I always wanted to do. It was a goal of mine since I was 10 years old,
Right.
to draw Spider-Man comics.
Mhm.
And I've told this story many times, but not in front of you, I don't think.
This is a
But
new.
I actually have my very first rejection letter from Marvel Comics. It was handwritten in red ink when I was 10. So I'd like folded up all my favorite Spider-Man drawings, put them in an envelope, sent them off to Marvel. My career was all planned out. I'm waiting for the phone call. And I get this letter in the mail. It's like, you're not quite ready yet. I'm like, what is this nonsense? What?
Who
I'm not quite ready. I'm gonna draw Marvel Team Up, and John Romita Sr. can draw Amazing Spider-Man. What's the problem here? And so I was disappointed, but I just kept at it.
and I would say, and I saw doing some research, you have the most Spider-Man #1 issues penciled by anyone.
Yeah, I penciled more #1 issues with Spidey or his cast. And that's just me, like a few years ago, going through my resume and
Right.
also connecting that to my own personal experience with my own comics, where people wouldn't buy issue #2 of my comic. They only wanted issue #1.
Right.
So I'm connecting all these dots. People love #1 issues. And then going through my resume, they gave me a lot of one shots and mini series and annuals, and they're all #1, folks. So so that's what I use. I made a huge banner for conventions and stuff like that, just saying, hey, I did more #1 issues featuring Spider-Man or his cast. So that's got to be something. And I'll tell you that sign has changed my convention life.
Right.
I mean, it gives me street cred. Impulse buyers who don't know who the heck I am, uh, they'll see it. Oh, I'm legit. Okay, let's see what this guy's got. So
But as the kid inside of you who wanted to draw Spider-Man your whole life, you're now part of Spider-Man history. That's got to be, pretty cool to say, I'm part of all this.
yeah, it's cool. It took me like 20 some years. I don't know, 50, I forget how many years, but so many years to get there. And then once I got there, I was like, okay, what's next? I'm not done yet. I'm still going. So that's when I started playing around with creator-owned projects. I did a mini series with Image called Megahurtz back in the 90s. And I kind of got diverted into commercial art and stuff like that, which helped me fund some of my other creator-owned stuff.
Right. Yeah, I want to get into your creator stuff in a second, but I just want to do a little jumping in the past. I was a big Valiant fan growing up.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and you
What
know,
were
you,
you, like 5 years old when that was
hey
happening?
man, I
Look
was in
at
my
you.
teens. I'm 46 years old.
No kidding. All right.
So
We all look young, us comic fans, I guess, right?
it keeps us young and youthful.
For sure. For
But what
sure.
was your experience like? Because you got so Valiant, it's sort of past the Jim Shooter time. And was Bob Layton running things at that point?
Oh, I was well in the midst of Jim Shooter time.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Jim was an important part of my learning process. You know what I mean? When I first joined Valiant, Jim was the editor in chief. Bob was like the art director and an editor, and Barry Windsor-Smith was kind of in and out of the house. You know, he was working on Solar, I think, and doing covers and stuff like that. Don Perlin was my editor, and these guys were all kind of formative mentors. You know, I think I learned more on the ground in the trenches at Valiant in 1 year than I did 4 years of art school. You know,
Wow.
this is just, you, you know, when I was in college, I was working on the side to pay the bills, right? So it's like now the learning and the paying
Right.
the learning and the salary are now focused, you know, into one area. So it was nonstop, you know, improving, you know, always trying to get better. So Shooter was great. Barry was I owe Barry my career, I think. And Bob was great. You know, Bob would do you know, on the spot inking lessons and stuff like that right there in the studio. And we all kind of worked. It was a studio atmosphere. There was about 20 of us. And then Jim and Bob and Barry were towards the front. And so they were very approachable
Mhm.
with questions. Bob, like I said, Bob would have these kind of inking tutorials, and we'd all stand around and watch him explain what his thought process was. Why is this line thicker here? Why is there a shadow here? You know, that kind of stuff. So I'm soaking all that stuff in, man. Soaking it all in. It's
I was
great.
just saying, I mean, you just mentioned an all-star team right
Yeah.
there to learn from it.
It's really the OG Image Comics, right? Like
Yeah.
all these creators who worked at Marvel
Right.
are now forming their own company, you know? And it just coincidentally, all the current hot artists are moving into their own thing too. So it was very interesting. It was an interesting time. And I did a book there, co-created a book called Secret Weapons, which, you know, in the middle of the speculator boom, it sold 600,000 copies, and it was number 9 on the Diamond previews chart or whatever bestsellers chart. And I'm like, wow, this is it. Wait till I draw Spider-Man. This is gonna, you know, I'm planning my house, you know.
Well, how did that come? I mean, what was the plan that you had for Secret Weapons?
Well, I didn't. I had a plan, and then the editors had a plan. So that's a whole nother episode, which we could get into.
Mhm.
But I was still kind of new at it. It was my first gig as a regular writer as well as an artist.
Mhm.
So I was basically just following editorial direction. Although I did have my own, you know, I did have my own. Hey, I'm going to go this in this direction. I had a long-term arc planned. That didn't quite go the way I wanted because the editors were like, "Oh, we're introducing this character next month. We want him to cross over." You know, the editorial direction kind of took over necessarily, you know, to my original idea. But that was a good time regardless.
I mean, it was sort of like the JLA or the Avengers of, Valiant. You gotten the best of the best together. How did you, as a writer, try to sort of give everyone equal time? Or were you kind of given parameters like, okay, we really want to push maybe Solar this issue?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was more like they were very into the continuity and the interweaving of the series into one or the other. So the whole crux of Secret Weapons at the time was there was a character in Solar that they wanted to improve upon, make him into a huge supervillain, and that was going to be the introduction of him in Secret Weapons, and he was going to cross over into Solar that month. You know, there was a lot of that interweaving
Right.
going on at the time. So it was very much kind of like, yeah, like you said, Justice League, Mission Impossible, depending on the storyline, depending on who the characters were.
Mhm.
that that appeared in the story. And then I remember Marvel at the same time coming up with a series called Secret Defenders,
Right.
which was very much the same thing. You remember that? It's like Doctor Strange was the leader, and he brought in certain characters from the Marvel U for depending on the adventure, right? I was like, okay.
Well,
This is good.
yeah, just to jump in for a second, you've written, you've penciled. Is there one that you prefer more than the other, or is it both pretty equal for you?
I consider myself a true comic book artist, which means they're intertwined.
Yeah.
The one is the other. I'm writing a script
Mhm.
for a story and it's all images. I'm describing images while I'll show you some of the original art, some of my pages. I'm writing dialogue on the side
Okay.
while I'm drawing the pages. So for me, comics is story and art combined.
Right.
And I can't, it's difficult for me to separate one from the other. It really is. When I'm working on my own stuff.
When you start a story, do you have an end game in mind? Like, do you have an arc in mind, or do you sort of see how it goes and then come up with a conclusion?
Um, I see the story very much like people do sketches. You know, you do construction first, right? You know, the face is a circle, and then you draw a line across halfway, and that's where the eyes go. And halfway down there, that's where the nose goes. And a story is very much this. I see it the same way. You know, this is how it starts. This is how it ends. You draw the line in the center. Something happens here that twists the story. And then as I'm illustrating it, because I'm writing the story, I have free reign. I want to build up the scene. The scene needs two more panels or another page, or we need a splash here. I have that free reign, and that's essentially the details. You know, after you've drawn your construction, now you're putting eyeliner on the character, and now it turns into a female. You're adding detail to the drawing, but this is story by story. Does that make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm
Okay.
also curious that when you're working either as an artist or a writer, what kind of collaboration do you like to have with either the artist you're writing with or the writer you're writing with? Because sometimes we hear there's a lot of collaboration, there's a lot of emails, there's a lot of discussion going back and forth, and sometimes something's done,
Yeah.
it's passed on to the next guy, and nobody's ever spoken to each other.
Yeah, I've kind of worked. I always saw a comic book. I always saw a comic book series like um like a baseball team or a band.
Mhm.
Like the writer is the voice, say. We can interchange these ideas, but the penciler is the lead guitarist and the inker is the bassist and the drummer is the letterer, that kind of thing. And so when everybody is working towards the character, all those parts working with the character, you get a great song or a great comic book or a great series.
Mhm.
And so so I was always in search of the right band. I wanted to work with the right people. I wanted to be the police, but I ended up being Sting. So I pretty much do everything, you know.
I-
For various reasons, I end up doing it all. So,
just one more Valiant question is because we spoke to a number of people who worked at Valiant. Were you part of Deathmate at all?
yes.
What
Yeah,
was that?
I wrote one of the stories
That's what I
in
figured.
Death Mate Blue.
What was that like? Because for us fans, it seemed like it was going to be like Lollapalooza. Like, how awesome is this? It's Image and it's Valiant. And from my perspective as a fan, it felt like you guys were putting in a lot more work as opposed to maybe what the other side was doing.
Oh, that's a whole nother episode too, Orin. That's cool. We could totally go there. That was fun. I remember it being the easiest money I ever made. So it was like I think it took me like 3 or 4 hours to write the story. And
Right.
talking about scripts,
Mhm.
I wrote it kind of Marvel style, and I think Sean Chen penciled it, and then it came back to me, and I wrote the dialogue.
Mhm.
So I think total might have been 5 or 6 hours worth of work, but the royalties that I got on that were like I was making like $3,000 an hour or
Right.
something crazy like that. It was pretty cool. Um, But let's leave that there because seriously, I went on a promotional tour with the Deathmate guys,
Right.
with Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee and Mark
Mhm.
Silvestri, and we did a bus tour from New Orleans up to Chicago, stopped off at like 8 or 9 stores, and ended at a convention. It was really a great time. It was very cool. So I mean, I could talk about that all day long, you know.
When you moved, what was the biggest difference you noticed from Image until you went to, Marvel and DC as far as communication went, as far as the atmosphere and the companies?
Well, it's very different. I mean, the Valiant was a studio. It
Right.
was just a group of creators all in one space, and we were all looking at what everybody else was doing and
Right.
stuff like that. So when I crossed over to Marvel, it was much different. The common area at Marvel was mostly production
Right.
prep, and then the editors were like a ring around the bullpen.
Mhm.
And so there's no studio atmosphere. It's just me working directly with editors, that kind of thing. So I would say that was the biggest difference. At the time, this is, middle to late 90s, the DC offices were almost like it struck me like these were the kids who did their homework and would kind of wouldn't share their homework with their fellow students, it had a different, at Marvel, people were in and out of
Right.
offices. It was kind of like a beehive, and people were very social.
Mhm.
And my experience at DC, which wasn't as much, I didn't do as much for DC as I did for Marvel.
Right.
uh, DC, there's nobody in the halls, very dimly lit halls, and everyone's in their offices doing their business. So that was a long time ago, though. It may have changed.
When you're, working with characters like that with either DC or Marvel, did you, were there a lot more parameters put on as far as your art went and your writing went to, were you allowed to expand it to how you wanted the stories to be, or did you have to sort of keep it within continuity of maybe how the previous artist or writer had done it?
Yeah, Marvel was much more, maybe I just fit the style they were looking for or something like that, but Marvel was much more creatively open to what I was doing.
Mhm.
I started at Marvel on Spider-Man 2099 stories,
Right.
and I was like, dude, remember, I'm 10 years old. I want to draw Spider-Man. So I
Mhm.
get a gig. My first gig at Marvel is Spidey 2099. I'm like, close, but no cigar. So at the time, I was bent on
Right.
drawing Peter Parker Spider-Man.
Mhm.
And so I drew Miguel O'Hara the way I would draw Peter Parker. I
Right.
drew Spider-Man 2099's webbing like the McFarlane style Spider-Man webs,
Mhm.
and I drew Spider-Man in action the way I would draw a modern day Spider-Man, Peter Parker. So it was that focus I had to draw Peter Parker Spider-Man.
Mhm.
And even now, like today, like, as I look at Spidey 2099, he's a different character. I would treat him differently, even the way he moves and stuff. You could get a little scarier with him, I think, than
Right.
I was back then. Back then, I was just like Peter Parker, Spider-Man. And so it just so happened that, the Tom Brevoort and Glenn Greenberg were
Mhm.
the editors at in the Spider-Man office. They saw the 2099 stuff, and next thing you know, I'm working on the Spider-Man, on Peter Parker. So mission accomplished.
I mean, what did you think of the idea of, because you had Punisher, X-Men, I think there was Ravage, and they're taking all these characters, franchise characters. We're going to jump in the future. We're changing a lot about them. Were you sold on it as soon as it was pitched to you, or were you kind of like, all right, I guess I'll have to just do it?
For me, it's a money grab. To me,
Mhm.
it's a commercial call,
Right.
and which if that's the case, great.
Right.
But why didn't they call Ravage Wolverine 2099? You
Right.
know what I mean? So there must have been some kind of creative integrity going on there somewhere where they wanted to create original characters. And now I meet kids all the time, who 2099 was their intro
Right.
into comics. So it's like, okay, so it seems like I've come up with the theory that, you have to create something like this, an alternate universe of some kind or some kind of variation so that new audiences can kind of approach it.
Right.
So I'm an old school guy. Like I said, I grew up on Spidey Marvel team up. So I'm looking at Spider-Man 2099 and all I see is that's not Spider-Man.
Right.
So I'm not interested in it. But a whole other audience,
Right.
who's much younger than I was at the time,
Mhm.
totally jumped in, right into the deep end. They loved it. So I still see people at shows who are like, Spider-Man 2099 is the best. Okay, good. Good for you.
I mean, but now with the Spidey into the Spider-Verse and all those films, he's become like the
There you
coolest thing
go.
that's ever
There
happened.
you go. Yep.
Those books are red hot. Everyone
Yep.
Spidey 2099.
Yep.
Did you ever think the
Marvel's
day would come?
Marvel's reprinting all the comics that you would find in the dollar bins. Yeah, Dollar Bin Bandits. You probably saw a lot of my work in the dollar bins. But now we're all of these huge omnibuses, hardcover royalty treatment, it's like, okay, let's do it. Let's do this.
But again, it jumps back to you're part of Spider-Man history. Like you were the guy who put this in motion. And,
Yeah.
if it wasn't for the work you did, how it caught fans the way it did, we wouldn't be talking about it today.
Yep, I don't know how to accept responsibility for that. I mean, I'm one of a cog in a multi-cog wheel, right?
Right.
And a machine that includes a million great creators, most of who are better than I am at what we do. So there you go. I'm a cog, and like I said, I met people who were affected by my cogs,
Mhm.
and I appreciate that very much. It's very cool.
I want to move on to second, just to talk a little bit about, you work with Transformers, you work with Power Rangers. When you're working with intellectual properties like that, I've heard from certain people that it can be kind of a pain that the folks who own the rights kind of want to see everything you're doing and to make sure it fits what their plan is for marketing. And other folks say it's sometimes given to them and it's just like, have at it. Like, we just want to get something out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Comics wise, it was this. I didn't have any trouble at all.
Okay.
But I have worked in commercial art and storyboards and IP design and stuff like that. And things are much more uh, stringent in those fields for me, in my experience, for sure. Yeah.
Because you've done all that, you like you said, storyboards and doing marketing. Could you seen a career where that was what you did, or did you have to do comics to lead you there to bring you back to comics at times?
Well, the commercial art world came about because people were seeing my comics.
Okay.
They'd see Spider-Man comics and like, who is this guy? And I'd get a phone call.
Mhm.
And that kind of led me astray, frankly. When I can do a single image for a magazine ad and I would get paid
Mhm.
twice as much as 3 issues of Amazing Spider-Man.
Right.
The money talks in that instance, but I'm still a creator. I'm still a comic book guy at
Right.
heart. So I still have to do the comics. And
Mhm.
thank God, most of the commercial art stuff that I did was very comic related, where I could write the story.
Right.
Um, where even if something didn't finally appear as a comic book, which very often it did,
Mhm.
um, I could still bring the comic book skills and the storyboard skills to the table and kind of satisfy
Right.
that instinct because I love panel to panel. I love page design. I love all that stuff. I don't just like, oh, great cover of Superman standing there. Awesome. I love I love the art form. I think it's better than movies. It's better than everything. I love comics,
Yeah.
so anytime I can do comics, I'm happy.
And creating your own comics. I mean, what was the point in your career where you said, you know what, I want to try my own thing. I want to put my own thing together and see where it goes from there.
Yeah, that was right about the time I did a mini series called Venom versus Wolverine. It was called Tooth and Claw. It was like the biggest selling book that I had done at Marvel. It wasn't the biggest selling book I had done. It was the biggest selling book I had done at Marvel. And I was like, oh, right about this time, a friend of mine who I worked with at Valiant, his name is Dave Klistic. He and I had been working on a story that I really thought was strong.
Mhm.
It was called Megahertz, and I thought this might be a good time, now that I've got a top 40 Marvel comic, this might be a good time to pitch at Image.
Right.
And sure enough, we got picked up at Image. Eric Larson picked the mini series up. So that's my first foray into creator-owned comics. And we just had the 25th anniversary, so I colored the book and I
That's awesome.
re-released it with a foil cover. So it's kind of a funny book to read, especially 25 years later,
Hmm.
because there's reference to corporate executives getting assassinated. There's reference to uh, criminal, corrupt presidents who wear makeup and present themselves like it's a showbiz event. This is 25 years ago. It's crazy that something that I was writing as a parody is unfortunately on the news today.
I was gonna say it's pretty strange.
It's supposed to be a joke, like this could never happen. You know what
Right.
I mean? We can't have Dick Tracy villains running our country. But
As a writer, reading it, what you wrote then to where you are now, how have you seen yourself evolve?
I'm just technically better at what I do. I would say that. Like, in the early days at Valiant, I'd be happy if I could walk through a book that I just finished and come up with five drawings that I liked,
Wow.
or five lines of dialogue that I was like, as a fan,
Right.
as that kid who got charged by reading comics.
Right.
I'm still looking for that charge, even in my own stuff. So
Mhm.
in the early days, if I could find five drawings that, oh, I like that drawing. Oh, that door is pretty cool, the way it's all faceted, and you know, uh, I would be happy. Now with this book, I could find five charges in the first half of the book. So I'm like, okay, good. I'm getting better.
Would
That's
you
a good sign.
would you say this is the best you've been? This is you
Oh
at your
yeah.
best right now?
I'm in my finest hour and I can't be more excited. There's stuff that happens in the new zodiacs. Before Pisces came out, we did the Aquarius
Right.
character. There's a scene in Aquarius, storytelling wise, that's never been done in comics. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, I did that? Holy shit. Ooh, excuse me.
That's all right.
It just happened to come out of me. I'm reading this. I'm like, this is great.
Right.
And I just so happen to have done it. And so writing wise, the combination of the writing with the art, I've never been better, very confident. You could disagree.
No, no,
And
no.
let's discuss that in our next episode.
So I mean, how did it all come together? Like New Zodiac, what was, the kernel for what you built these books out of?
Well, like I said, I've been creating characters since I'm a kid, so I got a lot of characters, dude. That's and there's a part of me that doesn't creatively, I recognize that it's hard for me to focus on doing 25 issues of the same character. And I recognize that in myself. I also recognize that in the marketplace, where if I did 25 issues of a character, the
Mhm.
sales, I wouldn't be able to support myself.
Right.
By the time this has been a time-worn formula since Silver Age and probably beyond. Issue one will sell X copies. Issue two will sell one half X copies. Issue three will sell one half issue two. Issue four, if you're lucky, that's why in Marvel Comics you saw the Submariner and Fantastic Four number four. You saw Captain America and Avengers number four. You
Right.
saw Thor and Silver Surfer number four, etc. So it's a time proven thing. That's just the way it works. So I'm like, okay, let's take some of my favorite, the ones that are creatively more ready to go, and let's connect them to a universe at least,
Mhm.
so that we can continue the idea. So these characters, the Aquarius character and the Pisces character, they share a universe and they'll interact with each other. But I feel like I need to introduce the characters first. It's just like Amazing Fantasy 15 was the first appearance of Spider-Man, and then Amazing Spider-Man 1, now he's running around with the Fantastic Four. So let's get the character locked down first, and then they can start to work together. That's the idea.
When you're creating a character, what's your blueprint? Do you start with a name? Do you start with an appearance, an ability, sort of a personality trait? What's the ground level for where you build from?
Hmm. I think it's different each time.
Okay.
Like the Pisces character, I had her down pretty good, but I her name is Cricket. The character's name is Cricket. And so I had Cricket very early, but I wasn't sold on the name. So I had to go through, while I'm drawing stories and developing the character, um, I'm in my notebook writing down different names. See if so I've got probably about 60 or 70 other names for this character. And then none of them popped. So I was like, okay, this is Cricket. So other times, the name probably comes first. When I was a kid, I used to comb the dictionary looking for cool names. I came up with a character called the Viper, and then the character with that name shows up in Captain America, and I'm like, oh, cool. That's my character.
I
So,
mean,
go
do you
ahead.
see this universe expanding more and more and more?
Oh yeah, sure, sure. And it's become a place where um some of my characters that I might be less interested in are kind of plugging in a little bit better, more suitably. And that's kind of cool. That's like these happy surprises, where it's like a character, I know there's something there, but I'm not sure how it would work. And then next thing you know, a story idea comes up with one of the characters I've already established, and it's like, okay, that's how we plug this guy in.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of fun when that happens.
How have you found the crowdfunding experience?
Well, they don't pay for my labor, but my followers will pay for the production, and so I take what I can get. So the Kickstarter, the crowdfunding, it's really a full-time job.
Right.
It's all a lot of promotion
Mhm.
and I'm really not great at that end of things. So to kind of get your interest, in social media or at appearances or something like that, that's a real challenge for me, and it's for me, it's a lot of work. It's a full-time job. I've been lucky, my books are funded on Kickstarter, so that's cool.
Mhm.
Um,
And we are back. Yeah, we have to set up another interview to talk about Deathmate, his experience on that, and for us fans, it was a big event, and we just want to hear what his stories were for it. But it sounds like a really awesome Kickstarter, and he's such a really cool dude. I hope you back it. We'll put the links down for you guys to back it, and we'll have to keep seeing what he's putting out there for all of us. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you on Friday.